In 1926, a French innovator secured a patent for a device purported to triple crop yields. Devoid of chemicals or machinery, it was merely a copper wire, supposedly harnessing atmospheric energy. Official documents, faint photographs, and even a British committee attested to extraordinary outcomes, such as 10-foot corn and colossal pumpkins. Yet, this technology vanished almost overnight, as if expunged from history. We often hear that larger harvests necessitate more fertilizer. But what if we exchanged a fundamental law of physics for a bag of chemicals? This narrative explores how the scientific principles behind this simple wire, and the industry that suppressed it, could fundamentally alter our understanding of food production. Justin Christofleau was not a prominent figure in the scientific community. He was a farmer, an experimenter, and an unrelenting tinkerer. Born in France in 1865, by the early 1920s, he had dedicated decades to pursuing a singular concept: that plants could flourish not solely on soil nutrients, but also on unseen energy from the sky. He invested his life in constructing peculiar apparatuses, metal rods, spirals, and antennas, staking his reputation on outcomes that defied conventional agricultural wisdom. On October 26, 1925, Christofleau filed a patent in Switzerland for what he termed the electromagnetic telluric celestial apparatus. The document, stamped CH118648A and granted the following May, detailed a system of copper and magnetic steel plates designed to capture atmospheric electricity and channel it into the earth. This was no mere conjecture. The patent remains on record, a legal artifact meticulously outlining every wire, plate, and connection. Christofleau's motivation stemmed directly from the fields. He asserted that his device enabled oats to grow 5 feet tall and revitalized old, dying trees. He disseminated his findings in books and agricultural journals, inviting scrutiny from anyone willing to visit his experimental gardens. The French press covered his work, often with a hint of skepticism, but frequently with astonishment at the photographs and diagrams he provided. For Christofleau, proof was consistently intended to be public, measured by harvests, not secrecy. Long before the advent of chemical fertilizers, he believed that nature already offered everything a plant required, if only we knew how to interpret its signals. His patent stands as a silent testament to a forgotten chapter in the science of food cultivation. Photographs from the mid-1920s depict vegetables that appear to belong to another realm. Pumpkins wider than barrels, cabbages almost as tall as a person. These images, published in Justin's books and pamphlets, fueled rumors of a breakthrough that defied all established rules of soil science. The pictures appeared in French gardening magazines and local newspapers, often accompanied by claims of harvests twice the usual size, sometimes even more. However, outside Christofleau's immediate circle, few could confirm the origin of these images or their authenticity. The British Electroculture Committee, established in 1918 under the Ministry of Agriculture, took notice. By the early 1920s, the committee was compiling reports, reviewing crop imagery, and deploying observers to sites across Europe. Their objective was straightforward: to distinguish fact from fiction. For nearly 2 decades, until 1936, the committee gathered field photographs, yield records, and testimonies from inventors like Christofleau. Their interim reports, marked not for publication, catalogued everything from giant barley stalks to the peculiar devices appearing in French gardens. Despite the striking visuals, the committee's files revealed a pattern of unanswered questions. No original negatives or independent validations for the most dramatic images ever emerged. The photographs, though compelling, always seemed to exist on the cusp between evidence and legend. For every snapshot of a bountiful crop, a lingering doubt persisted. Could a simple wire and rod genuinely account for such harvests? The visual evidence demanded further explanation. The quest for scientific validation was merely beginning. Every open space, from urban parks to rural fields, lies beneath an unseen river of electricity. The air above us carries a constant charge, positive in the sky and negative in the earth below. Physicists refer to this as the atmospheric potential gradient. On a clear day, the difference between sky and earth is approximately 100 volts for every meter of ascent. This is not lightning, nor a perceptible jolt, but a silent voltage, ceaselessly flowing like a gentle tide. Plants stand directly within this field. Their leaves and stems, covered in microscopic hairs and wax, act as natural conductors. Each blade of grass, each bean sprout, quietly gathers electrical charge from the air. Roots buried in the earth connect to the negative pole of this vast natural battery. The plant itself becomes a living antenna, bridging the gap between sky and soil. This is not merely a poetic image. The flow of electricity is quantifiable. In some experiments, a copper rod driven into the ground will register a faint current, proving that the air and earth exchange charge even on a calm day. While the voltage gradient can fluctuate with weather, the fundamental pattern persists: sky positive, earth negative, a difference that never ceases. Throughout most of history, this ambient field went unnoticed. However, in the early 20th century, experimenters like Christoffel pondered whether plants required more than water and nutrients. They questioned whether this silent current could be tapped, harnessed, or amplified. The concept was simple. If every plant is inherently an antenna, what happens when it is given a superior one? A copper wire, for instance, is far more conductive than a stem or a leaf. Planted in the ground, it can draw in atmospheric charge more efficiently, directing it precisely to the root zone. The Earth's natural electric field is subtle, yet it is always present. Understanding this invisible energy is the initial step toward comprehending how a single wire might transform everything in the garden. Within every plant, a silent dialogue unfolds in the language of electricity. Roots, stems, and leaves do not merely transport water and nutrients. They transmit minute electrical signals, known as action potentials and variation potentials, that surge through cells at the speed of life. These signals are not random. They function as messengers, initiating changes in growth, photosynthesis, and even how a plant reacts to stress or injury. For instance, when a tomato leaf is wounded, an electrical wave travels down the stem, alerting distant cells to activate their defenses. This represents plant physiology at its most fundamental, a living circuit finely tuned to its environment. Researchers have measured these signals using delicate electrodes, charting the subtle flickers of voltage that pass from cell to cell. Even a faint field, just a few microvolts per meter, can trigger a chain reaction. The plant's internal wiring responds to shifts in its surroundings, whether from sunlight, wind, or the subtle pull of the Earth's electric field. Some studies indicate that when exposed to an external electrical gradient, plants increase antioxidant production and activate genes associated with resilience and growth. The effect is not limited to injury or weather. It can be initiated by the simplest tools: a wire, a rod, or even a meticulously shaped coil. The spiral, a form ubiquitous in nature, from snail shells to sunflower heads, became a pivotal symbol in early electroculture. Inventors like Christoffel and his contemporaries believed that a copper spiral embedded in the soil could capture and concentrate the Earth's telluric currents. The geometry was not merely decorative. Spirals function like antennas, gathering energy from a broad area and channeling it to a single point. Early coil designs, inspired by both ancient traditions and nascent physics, sought to amplify the plant's natural signals, not to override them. The principle was straightforward: utilize geometry to attune to the frequencies already present in the field, allowing biology and physics to collaborate. This convergence of shape, signal, and soil is where electroculture diverges from chemical farming. Instead of forcibly feeding plants synthetic nutrients, the aim became to unlock the electrical pathways that evolution had integrated into every living cell. The copper wire, carefully shaped and oriented, was more than a conductor. It was a key, one that promised to open new avenues in the science of food cultivation. By the early 1920s, the enterprise of food production was poised for an irreversible transformation. Factories in Germany and the United States commenced mass production of synthetic ammonia on an unprecedented scale. The Haber-Bosch process, once a wartime secret, now filled train cars and cargo ships with sacks of chemical fertilizer. Production escalated from just over 1 million tons per year to nearly 20 million tons per year by 1960, driving down the price of ammonia from $100 per ton to less than $30 per ton. However, the true innovation lay not in the chemistry, but in the business model. Farmers who previously relied on compost or a one-time copper wire now encountered a new type of agreement. Purchase fertilizer every spring or risk a diminished harvest. A built-in subscription. Each season, another acquisition. Each year, another invoice. The market expanded as more growers subscribed, lured by the promise of higher yields and effortless application. The fertilizer industry burgeoned into a giant, its profits tethered to annual sales, not enduring solutions. In this emerging economy, a method that offered perpetual efficacy with a single piece of wire was not merely an alternative, it represented a fundamental threat. Editors and academics demarcated a clear boundary. Newspaper columns began to treat electroculture as a mere curiosity, not a viable contender. Newspaper stories often used terms like miracle cures and unconventional approaches, frequently grouping Christoph's efforts with perpetual motion machines and other scientific anomalies. Agricultural journals, which were once receptive to novel concepts, subtly shut their doors. Manuscripts received no responses, and letters to the editor went unacknowledged. University scholars, cautious about securing funding and avoiding mockery, refrained from public endorsement. The findings of the British Electroculture Committee, marked not for publication, seldom reached the broader scientific community. In prominent circles, electroculture was silently categorized as pseudoscience. The dialogue shifted from exploring the method's capabilities to questioning its relevance for discussion. By the late 1930s, narratives of copper wires and atmospheric energy had dwindled to mere footnotes and folktales. The need for evidence waned, replaced by an implicit consensus that certain experiments were too peculiar for respectable discourse. The quest for robust contemporary proof would have to await a future generation. In recent years, the search for evidence has evolved from examining old patents and garden photographs to surveying vast agricultural expanses. In China, researchers at the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences embarked on an unprecedented endeavor to test the concept of atmospheric electricity. Their experiment encompassed 3,600 hectares, an area exceeding 6,000 football fields, employing high-voltage wires suspended above the crops. This setup did not rely on fertilizers or pesticides. Instead, it harnessed the natural electric field between the sky and the earth, akin to the early pioneers' vision, but on a scale capable of sustaining an entire city. The outcomes were compelling. Across the trial fields, yields surged by nearly 30%. This meant increased wheat, rice, and vegetables without the addition of a single drop of synthetic fertilizer. The most astonishing result was not merely larger harvests. Pesticide use dramatically decreased, in some instances by as much as 70% to 100%. Farmers reported fewer pests and healthier plants, even in areas where pest control had previously been insurmountable. These were results that farmers could observe and quantify. This was not a casual backyard experiment or a stroke of luck during a favorable season. The study by the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences integrated the concept of electroculture into institutional science with data significant enough to dispel claims of mere coincidence. The findings indicated that plants, when exposed to the Earth's natural currents, could flourish on an energy source that had always been present, free, imperceptible, and readily available just above the soil. For the first time in nearly a century, the long-standing assertions of enhanced harvests, amplified by wire and weather, received substantial, quantifiable support on a national scale. Not every method claiming to promote plant growth operates identically or carries the same inherent risks. The copper spiral utilized in passive electroculture relies entirely on the natural voltage differential between the sky and the soil. There is no external power source, no batteries, and no cords connected to an electrical outlet. The copper wire merely functions as an improved antenna, silently gathering the subtle electrical charge naturally present in the air. This approach markedly contrasts with powered systems that transmit high-voltage electricity through fields. These systems employ transformers or generators to convey strong electrical currents via suspended wires, sometimes reaching thousands of volts. While such setups have demonstrated measurable results in controlled experiments, they introduce serious and dangerous hazards. Direct exposure to high-voltage lines can result in electric shock, fires, or damage to sensitive equipment. Even a minor wiring error can transform a garden experiment into a perilous situation. Passive copper spirals, conversely, are as straightforward as a weather vane. They pose no electrical threat to humans or animals, and do not interfere with nearby electronic devices. The only energy they capture is what the earth and sky naturally provide. This distinction is crucial. Conflating the two methods could lead to accidents or disappointment if one anticipates dramatic outcomes from a homemade coil connected to a car battery. The safety and simplicity of passive electroculture contribute to its appeal. It is a method accessible to anyone, requiring no electrical connections and posing no danger. However, it is essential to understand the boundaries and to conduct experiments strictly within safe parameters. A simple copper spiral embedded in the soil can transform any backyard into a dynamic experiment. The technique is not intricate, but precision is vital. Begin with a 14-gauge bare copper wire, roughly the thickness of a robust paperclip. Coil it into a loose spiral, aiming for a diameter between 5 and 20 centimeters. Some home gardeners use a 12 to 16 millimeter wooden dowel as a form to ensure uniform coiling. The finished spiral should have at least 3 turns, spaced to allow air and light to pass through the gaps. Once shaped, insert the dowel into the soil so the spiral sits 10 to 15 centimeters deep, with its upper end slightly protruding above the surface. The critical detail is that the tip of the spiral must point towards magnetic north. An inexpensive compass will suffice for this task. Do not omit this step. The Earth's telluric currents flow north to south, and proper orientation can determine the difference between a beneficial boost and no effect at all. Position the coil 10 to 20 centimeters from the base of your plant. Tomatoes, beans, and squash all respond favorably, but some gardeners observe the most significant results with leafy greens. To monitor changes, record height, leaf size, and pest activity every 2 weeks. Capture photographs and weigh your harvest at the conclusion of the season. One grower in Ohio documented a 40% increase in lettuce yield, with fewer aphids and no powdery mildew. He maintained all other variables, the same soil and water, and utilized just 1 copper spiral per row. While results may vary, the method is safe, silent, and requires no electricity beyond what nature supplies. For those willing to experiment, the cost is less than a cup of coffee, and it could profoundly alter your perception of what's achievable in a garden. Today, global fertilizer consumption exceeds 185 million tons annually, while soil health deteriorates and costs escalate. As cultivators seek sustainable solutions, the pertinent question is not whether electroculture is universally effective, but why straightforward, low-cost experiments pose a threat to multi-trillion-dollar industries. When sustainable energy encounters corporate resistance, progress is impeded for everyone. The abundance of the future hinges on what we dare to re-explore. If the prophet were not at the helm, the current system would fundamentally change, necessitating different approaches and strategies. My focus would turn to bolstering community engagement and civic participation. I would prioritize establishing platforms for open discourse and collective decision-making, ensuring a wider range of voices contributes to governance. This would entail regular public forums, digital suggestion boxes, and citizen assemblies to deliberate on matters affecting the populace. Economically, the absence of the prophet's guidance would prompt a re-evaluation of resource distribution and economic equity. I would advocate for policies promoting broad-based prosperity, potentially through cooperative ownership models and social enterprises. The aim would be to create an economic framework that benefits all members of society, rather than concentrating wealth, and that fosters sustainable growth and innovation through communal effort. In terms of social well-being, I would concentrate on reinforcing the foundational values that underpin our society: mutual respect, compassion, and justice. Programs would be initiated to support vulnerable groups, enhance educational opportunities, and ensure access to healthcare for everyone. The objective would be to cultivate a caring and inclusive society where each individual feels valued and has the means to flourish, addressing systemic inequalities and fostering a sense of shared responsibility.